Hey guys, so this video is going to be pretty fun for me. So Revit family creation basics. So we're not going to look at the picks and clicks of how to create a particular family. We will jump into one and kind of look at it real briefly, just on some visibility stuff and some line work, but that's about it. And but for the most part, what this is going to be the foundational things I think that need to be in place when you're creating any family. And what we'll do is we'll just go through this PowerPoint and kind of talk about that. So this is kind of the list. So families are optimized for repetition. We'll talk about that in the next slide, but to kind of give you an idea, when you create a family, it references that original family when you start placing it all over the place within a model. That's why in the project browser, you don't see a ton of the same families being duplicated. That is something you would see if you did a InPlace family and then placed it and then went ahead and started copying it. Limit detailed nested parameter families, avoid voids, avoid arrays and formulas, use symbolic lines, masking regions for plan views, avoid families that cut their host. This isn't a don't do these things tutorial. It's more or less like a keep it in mind because these do put a burden on the model and what it has to do to actually create those views and stuff. Anytime you're cutting voids or creating arrays or running a formula, it does impact the model. So keep that in mind. The idea is to optimize them, and that way you can use them effectively. To really increase that bottom line. And get a better ROI. Behind BIM in itself. So the first bit is placing InPlace families. So in this little image here, you can see that I've placed a generic model. That's what it was called. And then I copied it. So we have model 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are exactly the same. The problem is if I'm treating them like they need to be exactly the same, I would manually need to update each of them every single time. For the most part, InPlace families need to be created for one-off conditions where it's like because what's nice about InPlace families is that you have in context is the model itself, and then you can model around specific things and create that family. Awesome for that if you don't plan on using it a ton of times. If you do plan on using it a ton of times, then expect some issues when you have to go update it, because you're going to manually have to update each one. And you also have to think about the efficiency behind how an actual family will reference the data behind the original family, whereas this doesn't. Each family is individually different, so you're loading the project up with essentially separate families, which is not very good. So just do it when necessary. Parameterized families, you can see here this has a ton of parameters in it. So when you're creating parameters, keep that in mind. For the most part, I would imagine when you create parameters, you're not adding them for no reason. Usually there's a reason behind it. But if you go out to BIM objects or Revit City or something, you pull down a model, you may get stupid things like website, parameter, phone number, company name, all this stuff that's totally irrelevant and you don't need to know. In some instances, it may be useful, but for the most part, totally not. Just make sure that when you do that, purge out the family. That just helps the model essentially when you start placing these elements. Nested families. So you can see in this example, this one has quite a bit of nested families within it. So just keep in mind when you're pulling it in there, it does put quite a burden on the model ultimately when you bring those elements into the model. So just reduce it down to what's really needed and don't add a bunch of miscellaneous stuff. Voids, so avoid them. In this example, you can see I've highlighted the voids on the left. To the right, you can see the void actually cutting out those elements. It does have to do some calculations to do that, and the visibility of that it's nice, but it does put quite a burden on there. So keep that in mind when you're creating those elements. In some instances, you do need that. So not saying that you shouldn't, but just definitely try to keep it in mind that they do actually put quite a bit of a strain on the model. So when you're placing them, just remember that, and you should be good to go. arrays and formulas. So arrays are really cool, but if you don't plan on necessarily using them or flexing them again, just explode them. And now, after that, the model shouldn't have any issues with them. When you have a ton of arrays that are doing a lot, it does put quite a burden on the model. And again, with formulas. So you can see over here, this has a ton of formulas, makes it almost unusable for anybody else. They practically need a manual to know how to use it. And this isn't even all the parameters that are associated with this, or the formulas. But you can see there's quite a bit, and if I extend this formulas tab, we'd see that these parameters go on for a freaking mile. So just keep it in mind that when people use these, it's hard. When they try to update them, it's hard. When they actually flex them, it's hard. Sometimes the computer will lag quite a bit trying to figure out what the heck's going on, and sometimes they'll just break for no reason. So use symbolic lines and masking regions for plan views. The idea behind this is when you're in plan within the model, that you'll only see the symbolic lines and masking, and you won't see the actual model geometry, because the geometry itself not necessary when you're in a plan view. It's a plan view, so you'd only see 2D anyway, so why not just show 2D elements? And in this example, we're just looking at symbolic lines, and you can see that here. And then the way that you kind of make that happen is you use the visibility settings. You set this up to show specific and specific details, detail levels and whatnot. And then you come up here, you just say don't show up in plan view, pretty much. Avoid families that cut their hosts. So I don't have a picture here, but the idea behind this is a pretty good example is like a wall vent, or a diffuser or whatever that's associated with the wall, that it doesn't actually cut its host, unless there's a coordination reason to do that. And this is hard to do, but you have to determine these things. But sometimes you either don't ask the right questions or you don't know the right questions. But if you don't need it for coordination, then just put 2D line work that will host to the outside of the wall and not necessarily cut any elements within the project, because that does put a burden on the model. So we'll go ahead and close PowerPoint. We'll take a look at some of the visibility stuff, because I think that that's important, and how you can set up the model. So this model is actually, or this family is a little messed up. It's kind of floating in the air, but it'll still be fine to talk about. So in this 3D view, what we can do is grab these elements. We can come over here. So these are the 3D elements. We don't want those shown up in plan. What we'll do is we'll come over here to edit visibility. And this is just a visibility parameter associated with those elements. And what we'll do is we'll turn off plan. So we'll make sure that this is unchecked. So these do not show up in plan view. They do show up in the 3D view. But we can make them show up in certain detail levels. So we can say don't show up in coarse or medium, just show up in fine. This may not be a big deal for this particular element, but when you get more advanced families, it may be a little bit more important. So after you have that set up, you can go to your reference level, your floor plans level, go in there and then create the detailed line. So in this one, I've already done that. And the way that I did that was I went to create model lines, and then I did pick lines, and I went in here and just picked the lines. And then make sure that you select those elements, go to filter, and then check none, and then make sure that you select the mechanical equipment, press OK, or the mechanical equipment lines, or whatever the lines that you placed, and then go to your edit visibility settings. And then, since this doesn't really matter, we don't need to see these from front and back, and for the most part these detail levels are fine, because if we turn these off, nothing will show. And for 2D line work, I mean, I could imagine we could get pretty detailed with this without having to worry about that. Now, to preview this, you can see in the background that there is a 3D element here. To preview this, if you go down there, you can turn preview on, you can see that we only pick up that line work, so that 2D line work. Now we'll turn that off, and then we'll go to the 3D view and do the same thing. We'll just take a look at the visibility graphics. And so we will turn this, first what we'll do is we'll go to that reference plane, and since this model is kind of associated in a weird spot, I think what we'll do is we'll try to move it. We'll see if we can. We'll go ahead and leave it there so I don't mess anything up, and we'll just create an extrusion. I'm going to go here, go to that center line, and then we'll come out to here, and we'll press OK. Then we'll go to that 3D view again. We'll grab that element, we'll raise it to make sure it kind of looks like the other one, and then we'll make sure to grab it, go over here to edit visibility, and then what we'll do is we'll turn off fine, turn off plan, press OK, and then if we go in here and turn on our preview visibility, and then we can see when it's set to medium, we only see that simple extrusion. We go to fine, we see this. So it is a couple extra steps, but if you put in that extra time when you're setting up a family, and then you scale this across an entire project, and you try to track the ROI or the time saved behind, how long it takes to open models, how long it takes to navigate the model, how long it takes to add different things to the model. If you can quantify those numbers and then put a value behind it, you can see how important it is to try to optimize families. And families are what makes up a Revit project. So making sure that they're modeled correctly, they don't have a bunch of crap in them, they don't have a bunch of voids, a bunch of parameters, useless formulas that ultimately bog them down. If you do that, if you prevent those from happening, then you'll have a really effective, a really efficient modeling process. And when folks are getting in there, then they that time saved, quantified across an entire year or an entire project is huge. So just keep these in mind. Let me know if you have any questions, if you have any comments, or if you have anything to add to this, or you thought I missed anything. Let me know, and I appreciate you taking the time to watch this. Thanks.